The encounter. The sun was merciless that day, casting heavy shadows and sending waves of heat over the concrete jungle of Millbrook City. Officer Daniel Carter, a seasoned veteran of the force, drove his patrol car through the bustling city streets, the noise of daily life a familiar hum to his ears. He was in his early 40s, but the years on the job had aged him beyond his time. His sharp blue eyes, now slightly dulled from years of stress, scanned the streets. There was something about today, though, something uneasy simmering beneath the surface. He just couldn't put his finger on it yet. Carter's mind drifted, as it often did, to the life waiting for him outside of his uniform, or rather, the lack of one. 6 months had passed since his divorce was finalized. 6 months since the laughter, warmth, and companionship had been replaced by an empty house and silent evenings. He kept those thoughts locked in a box most days, but on the long shifts, they crept in uninvited. The divorce papers were still tucked away in a kitchen drawer, a stark reminder of another part of his life that had slipped through his fingers. As he turned onto 5th and Main, his attention shifted. In front of a rundown convenience store, a small figure caught his eye. A girl, no more than 7 or 8, her vibrant pink dress standing out against the grays and browns of the neighborhood. The dress seemed new, but it contrasted sharply with the girl's unkempt appearance. She was alone, which raised alarm bells. Carter slowed his patrol car, watching as the girl headed toward the store's entrance with a determined gait. The situation didn't sit right with him. He had been on the force long enough to know when something was off. This wasn't a neighborhood where young children wandered around unaccompanied. His gut told him to keep an eye on her. Minutes passed, and the girl finally emerged from the store. In one hand, she clutched a sandwich wrapped in greasy paper, and in the other, a bottle of alcohol. Carter's heart sank. This wasn't just a neglected child. He suspected she was being used in some way, forced to run errands that no child should be tasked with. Without hesitation, Carter parked his car and stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement with purpose. He approached the girl slowly, trying not to startle her. "Hey there," he called gently, his voice carrying across the small stretch of sidewalk. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" The girl's head snapped up, her wide, fearful eyes locking onto his. For a brief moment, Carter thought she might say something, but the fear in her eyes quickly turned into panic. Before he could take another step, she bolted, her tiny feet slapping against the hot pavement as she ran toward a narrow alley behind the store. Carter cursed under his breath and took off after her. "Wait, I'm not here to hurt you," he shouted, but the words fell on deaf ears. The girl was fast, faster than he expected. She disappeared into the shadows of the alley, leaving Carter skidding to a halt at the entrance. His breath was heavy, his mind racing with questions. He stood at the mouth of the alley, scanning the dark, cramped space before him. The alley was littered with overflowing dumpsters, discarded boxes, and random debris. It would be easy for a small child to hide here. Despite the heat, a chill ran down Carter's spine. Something about this situation wasn't adding up. As he cautiously moved further into the alley, Carter noticed something that made his blood run cold. Tucked between a pile of cardboard boxes was a piece of paper, hastily scrawled with childlike handwriting. He reached down and picked it up, his heart pounding in his chest as he read the words. "Help me. He made me do all this." Carter's breath hitched. His mind scrambled to make sense of it. Who was he? What had this little girl been forced into? The message was brief but powerful, a desperate cry for help from someone too young to even fully comprehend the horror she might be living through. The officer's training kicked in, overriding the emotions swirling in his mind. He needed to act. Fast. He quickly pulled out his radio and called in the situation. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I need immediate backup at 5th and Main. Potential child endangerment case. Possible abduction." After giving the necessary details, Carter remained on high alert, his eyes darting between the alley's nooks and crannies, hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl again. But she was gone, vanished into the shadows. The fear and urgency that had gripped him moments ago were now amplified. There was no time to waste. He glanced back down at the piece of cardboard in his hand, the haunting message staring back at him. Whoever this child was, she was in trouble, deep trouble, and whoever had put her in this situation was likely nearby, watching, waiting. As Carter stood there, the city's usual cacophony of noise faded into the background. For a brief moment, all he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. This was no ordinary day, no routine patrol. He had stumbled into something far darker than he had anticipated. And as the weight of that realization settled over him, Carter knew one thing for certain. This case was about to turn his world upside down. The haunting search. Officer Daniel Carter stood at the mouth of the narrow alley, the cardboard sign clutched tightly in his hand. The scrawled words on it seemed to echo louder than the city's endless noise. "Help me. He made me do all this." Every instinct in his body told him that time was running out. The girl was in danger, and whoever he was, he had to be stopped. He radioed in again, his voice more urgent this time. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I've got evidence suggesting child endangerment. The victim is a young girl, possibly around 8 years old. I need immediate assistance calming the area. Over." Carter's pulse thudded in his ears as he listened to the dispatcher acknowledge his call and confirm that backup was on the way. But backup wouldn't arrive fast enough. His gut told him that whatever was happening to that little girl was ongoing, and whoever was behind it might be closer than he thought. Carter couldn't wait. He had to act now. The alley stretched out before him like a maze of darkened corners and hidden dangers. Garbage bags spilled their contents onto the ground. Old crates were stacked haphazardly against the brick walls, and the acrid stench of decaying waste mixed with the oppressive heat, creating an atmosphere that felt suffocating. He could barely imagine a child hiding in such a place, but that's where she had disappeared. The officer's footsteps echoed off the narrow walls as he cautiously moved deeper into the alley, his senses on high alert. Every creak, every rustle made him stop and turn, ready to confront whatever, or whoever, might be lurking in the shadows. His hand instinctively moved to the holster at his hip, fingers brushing the handle of his gun, though he prayed he wouldn't have to use it. As he scanned the alley, something caught his eye. A trail of small, muddy footprints leading away from the dumpsters and toward the back of the building. They were child-sized, barefoot, just like the girl he had seen. His heart raced as he followed the prints, his eyes darting back and forth. The footprints led to a rusted metal door at the far end of the alley. It was partially ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze as if it had been used recently. Carter approached the door cautiously, pushing it open just wide enough to peer inside. The dim light from the alley barely penetrated the darkness beyond, but what he could see was enough to make his stomach tighten. Inside was a small, dingy room cluttered with broken furniture and forgotten debris. In the corner, a mattress lay on the floor, dirty and threadbare, as if someone had been living here. And next to it, there was something else, something that made Carter's blood run cold. It was a small stuffed bear, worn and missing one eye. The kind of toy a child might cling to in a moment of fear or sadness. His grip on the door tightened. Someone had been keeping a child here. The realization hit him with a force that left him breathless. He stepped into the room, his boots crunching on the broken glass that littered the floor. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement, any clue that might lead him to the girl. But the room was silent, eerily so. As Carter moved closer to the mattress, he noticed something else. More pieces of cardboard, like the one the girl had been holding. Each one had a different message scrawled on it, written in the same shaky, childish handwriting. "Don't tell. He'll hurt me. Please help me. He watches everything." A chill crawled down Carter's spine as he read the messages, each one more desperate than the last. The girl had clearly been leaving these notes as cries for help, hoping that someone, anyone, would find them. But who was he? And where had he taken her? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. Carter whirled around, hand on his gun, only to see his partner, Officer Jessica Reyes, standing in the doorway. She had arrived with the backup. "Carter," Reyes said, her voice low and concerned as she took in the grim scene. "What's going on here?" Carter shook his head, still trying to piece it all together. "I found this place. It looks like someone's been keeping a child here. Possibly the girl I saw earlier. She's left these messages. She's asking for help." Raya's eyes widened as she scanned the room, her expression growing darker with each passing second. "Where is she now?" "I don't know," Carter admitted, frustration seeping into his voice. "She ran from me, but I think she's still close. Whoever's behind this, they can't have taken her far." Ray stepped further into the room, her eyes scanning the makeshift living space. "This doesn't feel right, Carter. If someone's been holding her here, they might be watching us right now." The thought had already crossed his mind, and the weight of it hung heavy in the air between them. Whoever had been using this room had left in a hurry, but there were no signs of a struggle. The girl had escaped on her own, but she was still out there, vulnerable and terrified. "We need to search the area," Carter said firmly, his mind racing with possibilities. "This isn't just some runaway. This is a child in danger, and we need to find her before he does." Reyes nodded, already reaching for her radio. She called for additional units to search the surrounding blocks, her voice calm and authoritative, despite the urgency of the situation. As Carter and Reyes exited the room and re-entered the alley, Carter's thoughts whirled. There were so many unanswered questions, so many unknowns. Who was this man who had taken the girl? Why had she been forced to do whatever all this was? And most importantly, where was she now? The minutes ticked by as Carter and the other officers fanned out, searching the nearby buildings, alleys, and streets. The city that had once seemed so loud and bustling now felt suffocatingly quiet. Every second that passed without finding her was another second that the mysterious man could be getting further away. Suddenly, Carter's radio crackled to life. "Carter, Reyes, this is Officer Jenkins. We found something at the playground 2 blocks over. You'd better get here quick." Carter's heart skipped a beat. The playground. It was a place where children should be safe, where laughter should echo in the air, not fear. Without another word, he and Reyes sprinted toward the location, their feet pounding the pavement as they raced against time. As they arrived, Carter's eyes locked onto a familiar sight. Sitting on one of the swings, her legs dangling limply, was the girl in the pink dress. But she wasn't alone. Standing behind her was a man, a tall, wiry figure with a menacing look in his eyes. His hand rested firmly on the girl's shoulder, and the expression on his face told Carter everything he needed to know. This was the man who had been haunting the little girl's life, and he wasn't about to let her go easily. The standoff. The world seemed to slow down as Officer Daniel Carter's eyes locked onto the little girl sitting on the swing. Her vibrant pink dress fluttered faintly in the wind, but there was no joy in her posture, no innocence left in her slumped figure. Her tiny hands gripped the chain of the swing, but she didn't move. Fear radiated from her like a physical force. Behind her stood the man, tall, gaunt, and predatory. He had a thin, angular face, sunken eyes, and a jagged scar running down his cheek, adding a layer of menace to his already hardened appearance. His hand rested heavily on the girl's shoulder, fingers digging into her skin just enough to show control. Even from a distance, Carter could see the tension in the girl's frame, her body rigid under the weight of his grip. Carter's heart pounded in his chest, his hand instinctively moving toward the holster at his side. His partner, Officer Reyes, stood next to him, her eyes fixed on the scene before them. It was clear they were dealing with someone dangerous, someone who wouldn't hesitate to use the girl as leverage if things went south. "Reyes," Carter whispered, his voice low and measured. "We need to handle this carefully. If we rush in, he could hurt her." Reyes nodded, her jaw clenched with determination. "I've got your back. Let's try to talk him down first. If that doesn't work, We'll act fast. Carter's mind raced. This wasn't just a random predator. They had walked into a calculated trap. The man had taken the girl from the shadows of the alley and brought her to a public place, likely hoping to blend into the surroundings, to make it harder for anyone to intervene. But now they had him cornered. And the way he stood, his stance full of arrogance and control, told Carter that this man wasn't about to give up easily. Taking a deep breath, Carter stepped forward slowly, hands out in front of him, palms facing the man to show he wasn't drawing his weapon. Yet, "Hey, buddy," Carter called out, his voice calm but authoritative. "We don't want any trouble here. Let's talk about this. There's no need to hurt the girl." The man's eyes flickered toward Carter, cold and calculating. He tightened his grip on the girl's shoulder, making her wince, but she stayed silent, her wide eyes locked on the ground in front of her, too scared to even look up. "She's fine," the man growled, his voice rough like gravel. "You're the one causing the trouble, cop. This has nothing to do with you." Carter took another step closer, his movements slow and deliberate. He could feel Reyes beside him, mirroring his steps, their training kicking in as they worked in unison. They had to get closer without spooking him, without giving him a reason to lash out. "Look, we just want to help," Carter continued, keeping his voice steady. "Whatever's going on, we can work it out. But the girl, she doesn't deserve this. Let her go and we can talk." The man sneered, his lips curling into an ugly grin. "Talk? What's there to talk about? You think you know what's going on here, but you don't have a clue." Carter's pulse quickened. This man wasn't just dangerous. He was unpredictable. Every second the girl spent in his grasp was another second her life was at risk. Carter's eyes flicked briefly to the girl, searching for any sign of what she was thinking. She was still trembling, but there was something else, something in the way her hands gripped the chains of the swing just a little tighter. "Help me," she had written. "He made me do all this." Carter had no idea what all this meant, but he knew that the man standing in front of him was the key to unraveling it all. Reyes spoke up then, her voice soft but firm. "We're not here to hurt you. We can help, but you need to let her go. Whatever you're running from, we can figure it out together." The man's eyes darted between Carter and Reyes, suspicion etched into every line of his face. For a moment, Carter thought he might relent, that they were getting through to him. But then something shifted in his gaze, a darkness that sent a chill down Carter's spine. "No," the man spat, his voice laced with venom. "You don't get it. You'll never get it." Before Carter could react, the man yanked the girl to her feet, pulling her in front of him like a shield. The little girl let out a small whimper, her eyes wide with terror, as the man's arm snaked around her throat. "Don't come any closer," he barked, his voice rising with desperation. "I'll do it. I swear I'll do it." Carter froze, his mind racing. The situation had just escalated to a dangerous new level. One wrong move, and the girl's life could be over in an instant. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his voice remained calm, even as his heart thundered in his chest. All right," Carter said slowly, raising his hands higher to show he wasn't a threat. "No one's moving. Just, let's talk. You don't want to hurt her. I can see that." The man's grip on the girl tightened, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Just a flicker. Carter lashed onto it. "What's your name?" Carter asked, his voice gentle, probing. "I'm Daniel. What's yours?" The man hesitated, his grip loosening ever so slightly. "G. James," he muttered, his eyes darting nervously between Carter and Reyes. "James," Carter repeated softly. "Okay, James. Listen, I don't know what's happened, but I do know that whatever it is, it doesn't have to end this way. You don't have to hurt her, James. She's innocent." "Innocent?" James laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. "She's just like the rest of them. You don't know what she's done, what I had to do to survive." Carter's heart sank. James was unraveling, his mind fractured by whatever horrors he had experienced. But there was still a chance, still a sliver of hope. "You're right," Carter said softly. "I don't know what you've been through, but hurting her isn't going to fix it. You can walk away from this, James. We can help you." James's eyes flickered again, doubt creeping into his features. For a moment, Carter thought they had him, thought he might release the girl. But then, James's face twisted into a mask of rage, his hand moving to something inside his jacket. Carter's heart skipped a beat. "James, no." Before he could finish, Reyes was already in motion. In one swift movement, she had drawn her gun, pointing it directly at James. "Drop it. Now." James froze, his hand hovering over the weapon concealed in his jacket. For a tense moment, time seemed to stretch endlessly. The girl, still trapped in James's grip, stared up at him, her small body trembling like a leaf in the wind. And then, with a deep, shuddering breath, James slowly released his hold on the girl. She stumbled forward, collapsing to the ground in a sobbing heap as Carter rushed forward to pull her to safety. Reyes kept her gun trained on James as he slowly raised his hands in surrender, his face twisted with anger and defeat. "It's over, James," Reyes said, her voice steady. "It's over." Unveiling the truth. The scene felt frozen in time, as if the world had stopped turning for just a moment. Officer Daniel Carter held the little girl in his arms, her frail body shaking with sobs as she clung to him, her small hands gripping his uniform like a lifeline. Every muscle in Carter's body was tense, his mind racing to process the rapid events that had just unfolded. The adrenaline that had surged through him only moments before was now slowly ebbing, leaving behind a cold, gnawing feeling in his gut. Behind him, Officer Jessica Reyes kept her gun trained on James, who stood with his hands raised in defeat, his face still twisted in a mix of anger and fear. The air was thick with tension, but for now, the immediate danger seemed to have passed. The little girl was safe, but the weight of the situation pressed down on Carter, reminding him that this was far from over. Carter gently pulled back from the girl, brushing a lock of hair from her tear-streaked face. "Hey, you're okay now," he whispered, his voice soft, though his heart was still pounding. "You're safe. What's your name?" The girl looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. "I'm Maya," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "My name is Maya." Carter smiled gently, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Maya, you're doing great, okay? I'm going to get you out of here. But I need you to tell me something. Who is this man? What did he make you do?" Maya's gaze flicked toward James, and her body tensed up again. She shook her head rapidly, tears welling up in her eyes. I can't say it. He'll get mad. He'll hurt me again." Carter's heart clenched at the words. "No, Maya. He can't hurt you anymore. I promise. He's not going to touch you again. You're safe now." He kept his voice as calm and reassuring as possible, but inside, a fire of rage was building. Whoever James was, whatever he had done to this little girl, Carter knew he had to get to the bottom of it. And fast. Officer Reyes stepped forward, her gaze hardening as she kept her gun leveled on James. "James," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You need to come clean. We already know something terrible has been going on. The more you cooperate now, the better it'll go for you." James laughed bitterly, his eyes dark and wild. "You think I care about that? You think I care about any of this? You don't know anything about what's really going on." Carter stood up slowly, positioning himself between Maya and James, shielding her from the man's gaze. "Then tell us, James," Carter said, his voice steady but full of underlying steel. "Tell us what we don't know. Because right now, all we see is a little girl who's terrified, and you're the one who put her in that position." James's sneer faded for a moment, replaced by something that almost looked like regret. He lowered his arms slightly, as if the fight had left him entirely. "You wouldn't understand," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Try us, Rice said sharply. Because right now, all we have are assumptions, and those assumptions are going to land you in a lot more trouble than you can handle. But if you talk, if you tell us what really happened, you might have a chance. For a moment, James hesitated, his eyes darting between Carter, Rice, and the little girl who cowered behind them. Then, as if something inside him broke, he sagged, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I didn't want to hurt her, he muttered, his voice hollow. I didn't want any of this. But I had no choice. Carter exchanged a quick glance with Rice. They had heard lines like this before, criminals trying to justify their actions, trying to paint themselves as victims. But something about James's tone caught Carter off guard. There was a desperation in his voice, a depth of fear that went beyond the usual excuses. This was more than just a man trying to save his skin. No choice? Carter asked, his voice quieter now, trying to pull more out of James. What do you mean, James? What were you forced to do? James's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and fear. He took a deep breath, as though gathering the strength to confess a truth he had kept hidden for far too long. They made me do it, James said, his voice trembling now. I didn't want to, but they wouldn't let me walk away. They control everything. They see everything. I'm just a pawn to them. And Maya was supposed to be part of the plan. Carter's stomach turned at the mention of Maya's name. What plan, James? Who are they? Who's controlling you? James shook his head furiously, his eyes wild. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. No one ever does. But I swear, they're everywhere. They make people disappear. They ruin lives. And if you get in their way, they'll come for you too. Carter's mind raced as he tried to make sense of James's cryptic words. Was this man simply delusional, or was there a deeper conspiracy at play? His gut told him that James was genuinely afraid of something far more dangerous than just getting caught by the police. But before Carter could press for more answers, Maya's voice cut through the air, trembling but determined. He made me steal, she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with shame. He told me if I didn't, bad things would happen. To me, to my mom. Carter's heart sank as the pieces started to fall into place. Maya had been forced into petty crimes, shoplifting, delivering illicit packages, all under the threat of violence. James was the one pulling the strings, but now it was clear he wasn't working alone. There was a bigger force behind all of this, manipulating both James and Maya. Maya, Carter said softly, crouching down to her level again. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But it's over now, okay? We're going to keep you safe. We'll help your mom too. Maya nodded weakly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't want to do it. But he said if I didn't, they'd take my mom away. That they'd hurt her. I didn't know what else to do. Carter's chest tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow. This wasn't just about one man terrorizing a child. This was about an organized group, a network of criminals who preyed on the vulnerable, using fear to control and manipulate. James, still standing with his hands in the air, let out a bitter laugh. You see now, don't you? This isn't just about me. It's bigger than you can imagine. And if you don't stop them, they'll come for you too. They don't leave loose ends. Carter exchanged another glance with Rice, both of them now fully aware that this case was far more complex than they had initially thought. But one thing was clear. They couldn't let fear paralyze them. Whoever they were, Carter wasn't going to back down. James, Carter said, stepping forward. We need names. We need information. Who are these people? Where can we find them? James shook his head again, a look of despair crossing his face. I can't. If I talk, they'll kill me. And they'll come for her too, he said, nodding toward Maya. Carter's jaw tightened. This wasn't the first time he had encountered criminals who were too scared to talk, but the stakes felt higher this time. He needed to protect Maya, but he also needed to dismantle whatever criminal operation had put her in this situation. Before Carter could press further, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. More officers were arriving, responding to the earlier call for backup. The playground was soon filled with the blue uniforms of the Millbrook Police Department, their radios crackling as they secured the area. Carter turned back to James, his eyes hardening. "You're coming with us, James, and we'll make sure Maya is safe. But one way or another, you're going to tell us what we need to know." James's shoulders slumped in defeat, his defiance fading as reality set in. He knew he was cornered, and there was no escaping what came next. As officers moved in to handcuff James and take him into custody, Carter knelt beside Maya once more. "Maya, it's over now. We're going to help you, and we'll make sure your mom is safe too. You're not alone anymore." Maya looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, and for the first time since he had seen her, there was a glimmer of hope behind the fear. The web of deceit. The sky had begun to darken as Officer Daniel Carter sat in the precinct, staring at the evidence laid out before him. The room was eerily quiet, the weight of the case hanging over him like a dark cloud. On the table in front of him sat the scrawled notes from Maya, the makeshift cardboard signs she had written in desperation. "Help me. He made me do all this." The words echoed in his mind like a haunting refrain. James had been taken into custody, and Maya was now safe, resting in a protected part of the precinct with social services looking after her. But Carter knew this was just the beginning. The man they had arrested, James, was a pawn in something much larger, something that had been lurking in the shadows of Millbrook City for far too long. As he stared at the notes, his mind kept circling back to James's cryptic warnings. "They're everywhere. They see everything. You'll never be able to stop them." At first, Carter had dismissed these statements as the paranoid ramblings of a desperate criminal. But the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. There was something about the way James had spoken, a deep-rooted fear that went beyond simply getting caught by the police. James wasn't afraid of prison. He was afraid of something, or someone, else. The door to the room creaked open, and Officer Jessica Rice walked in, a file in hand. She dropped it onto the table with a thud, her face lined with exhaustion but determined. "We've got more on James," she said, pulling up a chair next to Carter. "Turns out he's been in and out of the system for years. Petty crimes mostly. Drug dealing, minor theft. But nothing that connects him to a larger network. At least, nothing on the surface." Carter leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his tired eyes. "But we both know this isn't just about him," he muttered. "There's something bigger going on here. Maya's terrified, James is terrified, and they both hinted at some kind of organized operation. We need to find out who's pulling the strings." Reyes nodded grimly. "I agree. And I did some digging. There've been similar cases over the past year. Kids caught shoplifting or running small errands for local criminals. But in each case, the kids wouldn't talk. No one would. They'd clam up as soon as we got close. It's like they've been trained to be too afraid to speak." Carter's stomach turned. The thought of an entire network of children being manipulated and exploited made his blood boil. So what? We're dealing with a ring of traffickers, or something even worse. Ray shook her head, her expression dark. "That's what we need to figure out. But it's not going to be easy. Whoever's behind this is smart. They're covering their tracks. And if James is telling the truth, if they really are everywhere, then we've got a much bigger problem than we thought." Carter stood up, unable to sit still any longer. He began pacing the room, his mind racing. "We need to get James to talk," he said, his voice sharp with frustration. "He knows more than he's letting on. And if we don't crack him soon, Maya's not going to be the last victim." Reyes crossed her arms, her brow furrowing. "James is scared out of his mind. He's not going to talk unless he thinks we can protect him. And right now, he doesn't believe we can." Carter stopped pacing and looked at Reyes, his mind forming a plan. "Then we need leverage. We need to show him that we're serious, that we can take these people down and keep him safe in the process." Reyes raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan to do that? We start with Maya, Carter said, his voice resolute. She's our key. She might not know much, but she's been in this far longer than James. She might have seen or heard something that can lead us to the next step. Reyes sighed, her face softening slightly. Carter, she's just a kid. She's been through hell already. You really think we should be pushing her for more information right now? Carter felt a pang of guilt at the thought. Maya had been through enough trauma for a lifetime, and the last thing he wanted to do was put more pressure on her. But the stakes were too high. If they didn't act, more children like Maya would end up in the same nightmare. I don't want to push her, Carter said softly. But we don't have a choice. If we can get her to remember anything at all, it could save lives. Reyes nodded reluctantly. All right, let's do it. They made their way to the protected area where Maya was staying. Her room was small but comfortable, with soft lighting and a few toys scattered around to make it feel less like an interrogation room. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, hugging a stuffed bear to her chest, her eyes red from crying but calmer than she had been earlier. Carter knelt down beside her, speaking softly. Hey, Maya. How are you doing? Maya looked up at him with wide, tired eyes. Okay, I guess, she whispered. Is he gone? The man who took me. Carter nodded gently. Yes, he's gone. He can't hurt you anymore. You're safe now, I promise. Maya's grip on the bear tightened. What's going to happen to my mom? Carter's heart ached at the question. We're going to find her, Maya. And we're going to make sure she's safe too. But we need your help to do that. Can you tell me anything about the people who were with James? Did you see anyone else, or hear anything that could help us find them? Maya hesitated, biting her lip as if unsure whether she should speak. Carter waited patiently, giving her the space she needed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Maya nodded slowly. There was a woman, she said quietly. She came to the house sometimes. She was scary. She told James what to do. She told him to make me do the things I didn't want to do. She said if I didn't, she'd hurt my mom. Carter felt a surge of hope. This was it, the connection they needed. Do you remember anything about this woman? What she looked like? Where she might have gone? Maya thought for a moment, her small brow furrowing in concentration. She had red hair, she said finally, and she wore a lot of black. She had a big car, a shiny one. I heard James call her the Raven. The Raven, Carter repeated, his mind racing. This was more than a nickname. It was a lead. A dangerous woman who seemed to be orchestrating the operation. They had a name, or at least an alias, to work with now. And with that, they had a thread they could pull on. Reyes leaned in, her voice soft. Maya, you've been so brave. You've helped us more than you know. We're going to take care of you and your mom, okay? Maya nodded, her grip on the stuffed bear loosening just a little. Okay, she whispered. Carter stood, his mind already spinning with the next steps. He looked at Reyes, and she gave him a grim nod. We need to find this woman, Reyes said quietly. We need to find the Raven before she disappears, and we need to do it fast. Carter agreed. There was no time to waste. The web of deceit they had uncovered was growing more dangerous by the minute, and the longer they waited, the more likely it was that the Raven and her network would vanish into the shadows. As they walked out of the room, Carter's mind was already planning their next move. They had a name, a description, and a lead. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And they were going to tear this operation apart, piece by piece, until every last person responsible for hurting Maya, and children like her, was behind bars. The final confrontation. The rain fell in heavy sheets over Millbrook City, washing the streets clean, but adding an air of gloom to the already tense atmosphere. Officer Daniel Carter and Officer Jessica Reyes sat in their patrol car, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. The storm mirrored the turmoil in their minds, both feeling the weight of the investigation pressing down on them as they prepared to confront the Raven. The information Maya had provided about the woman had sent them racing to a nearby neighborhood where she was known to frequent. The Raven was said to operate in the shadows, using her connections to manipulate vulnerable individuals and exploit children. Carter's heart raced as they drove toward their target. He knew this was a pivotal moment in their pursuit of justice for Maya and countless others. "Do you think Maya's mom will be there?" Rise asked, breaking the silence as she scanned the streets, looking for any sign of the suspect. Carter nodded, his jaw set with determination. "If she's involved in this operation, we need to find her. But we have to be careful. This woman is dangerous." Rise parked the car a block away from a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, its dark silhouette looming against the stormy sky. They stepped out into the rain, pulling on their gear and adjusting their radios. "Let's approach from the back," Rise suggested. "If we catch her off guard, we might have a chance to get some answers." Carter agreed, his instincts sharpened by years of experience. As they crept around the side of the building, the sound of rain mingled with the distant hum of city life. They reached a side entrance, its rusted door slightly ajar. The shadows inside beckoned them forward, a dark portal into the unknown. "Stay close," Carter whispered as they slipped through the door, the sound of dripping water echoing in the darkness. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, crates and debris littering the floor. The air felt thick with tension, the silence almost suffocating. As they moved deeper into the building, Carter's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of life. Suddenly, they heard voices, a low murmur just beyond a stack of crates. Carter and Rise exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding in unison. They pressed against the wall, inching closer to the source of the sound. "What do you mean she's gone?" A voice hissed, dripping with irritation. It was a woman's voice, smooth but laced with an edge that sent chills down Carter's spine. "You had one job to do, James." James? Carter's mind raced back to the man they had arrested, the one who had orchestrated the events that led to Maya's abduction. He was here, but why was he speaking to the Raven? "Look," she was scared. She ran when the cops showed up. Another voice replied, shaky and defensive. Carter recognized it as James's voice. "I didn't think they would come this quickly." "Think." The woman's voice snapped like a whip. "You've let a child slip through your fingers. Do you have any idea what they'll do to us if they find out we failed? They'll come for you, and they'll come for me. You know what's at stake." Carter exchanged a glance with Rise, the urgency of the situation clear in their eyes. This was their chance to confront the Raven, but they had to tread carefully. Carter signaled for Rise to take position on one side while he moved to the other, preparing for a potential confrontation. As they positioned themselves, Carter's heart raced. This was the moment they had been working toward, the confrontation that would unravel the web of exploitation and abuse. He took a deep breath, readying himself for what lay ahead. "Let's go," Carter whispered, nodding to Rise before stepping into the open. The sudden movement startled James, who spun around, his eyes wide with fear. "Carter, Rise," he gasped, clearly realizing that his time was up. But before he could react further, the Raven turned, her expression shifting from surprise to rage in an instant. "You, how dare you intrude?" She spat, her eyes narrowing as she took a step forward. "Put your hands where we can see them," Carter commanded, raising his weapon, feeling the weight of the moment. "You're under arrest." The tension in the air crackled as the Raven let out a low, menacing laugh. "Arrest me? You have no idea what you're dealing with, do you? I'm not afraid of you or your badge." Carter felt the anger surge within him. "You're preying on children, and it stops now. You can't intimidate us into backing down." "Oh, but it's not just about intimidation, officer. You're in way over your head. You have no idea how deep this goes," she said, her voice a silky threat. "You think you can just arrest me, and everything will be fine. I have connections you can't even begin to understand." Carter's mind raced. The information Maya had shared was crucial. This woman was clearly tied to a larger network of criminals, and if they could get her to talk, they might finally expose the entire operation. "Tell us what you know," he said, his voice firm. "Tell us who's involved, and maybe we can work something out." "The only thing you'll get from me is a one-way ticket to regret," she shot back, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're just a pawn in a much larger game, Carter." Before Carter could respond, James stepped forward, desperation in his eyes. He stammered, looking from Carter to Reyes, and then back at the Raven. "I can't keep doing this. It's wrong." The woman's expression darkened, her smile fading into a glare. "You'll regret this, James. You know what happens to people who betray me." Carter took advantage of the moment of distraction. "This is your last chance, James," he said, his voice steady. "Help us take her down, and we'll ensure you get protection." James's face contorted with conflict as he glanced between the officers and the Raven. I can't. She'll kill me. You don't understand." Carter stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I understand enough. She's using you, James. You're not a criminal. You're a victim just like the rest of us. You can help put an end to this." The tension in the room felt palpable, and for a moment, it seemed as if James was wavering, his resolve cracking. But then, the Raven laughed again, her voice sharp and cutting. "You think he'll turn on me? You're mistaken. He knows what I'm capable of." But James looked directly at Carter, his eyes filled with fear and determination. I can help. I can tell you where she gets the kids. Just don't let her hurt me." Before Carter could respond, the Raven lunged toward James, a swift and predatory move. "You traitor," she screamed, but Reyes was faster, aiming her weapon at the woman. "Stop right there," Reyes commanded, her voice unwavering. The situation exploded into chaos. James, in a moment of desperation, pushed against the Raven, trying to escape her grasp. "I won't let you hurt anyone anymore," he yelled, shoving her back. The woman stumbled but quickly regained her balance, her eyes blazing with fury. In that split second, Carter moved forward, determined to take control of the situation. He lunged toward the Raven, aiming to restrain her before she could retaliate. But she was quicker than he anticipated. With a swift motion, she drew a knife from her pocket, brandishing it in a dangerous arc. "Get back," she shouted, pointing the blade at James, who had fallen to the ground, scrambling to put distance between them. "You'll regret this, all of you." Carter's instincts kicked in. "Reyes, cover me," he shouted as he lunged at the Raven, his heart pounding with adrenaline. "Don't," Reyes yelled, but it was too late. Carter reached for her wrist, trying to wrestle the knife away. "You don't want to do this," he urged, feeling the tension escalate as their bodies collided. "The only thing I want is to protect what's mine," she hissed, struggling against him. In the midst of the chaos, Carter could feel the danger escalating, the threat of violence hanging in the air. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse as another group of officers burst through the front entrance, having received the backup call. "Police! Hands up!" they shouted, flooding into the dimly lit space. In that moment of distraction, the Raven saw her opportunity. She pulled away from Carter and bolted toward a side exit, making a desperate dash for freedom. "You'll never catch me," she screeched, her voice piercing through the noise of the rain outside. "After her," Reyes yelled, taking off after the woman as Carter regained his footing. "James, stay down," Carter shouted, glancing back to ensure the former accomplice was safe. The young man's face was pale, the fear still etched into his features. But now, a flicker of determination ignited in his eyes. With officers in pursuit, Carter rushed after Reyes. The chase took them through the maze of crates and debris, the sound of pounding rain mixing with the chaos inside the warehouse. "She won't get away," Carter yelled, adrenaline surging through him as he pushed himself faster. They burst through the back exit just in time to see the Raven slipping into a sleek black car parked nearby. The engine roared to life as she gunned the engine, her eyes wild with defiance. "Stop!" Ray shouted, raising her weapon again as the vehicle screeched away from the building, tires spinning in the slick conditions. Carter sprinted toward his patrol car, reaching for the radio as he jumped inside. "Dispatch, we have a suspect fleeing the scene. Black sedan, heading north on Route 17. Requesting backup." He could hear the dispatcher responding in his ear, but his focus was on the road ahead. "Stay on her," he ordered Rise, his heart racing as he flipped on the lights and took off in pursuit. With rain pelting against the windshield and visibility low, the chase was fraught with peril. But they couldn't let the Raven escape. Not now, when they were so close to unraveling the entire network that had exploited so many children. As they sped down the slick road, Carter's mind raced with thoughts of Maya, of the lives that had been disrupted and shattered. They had to catch her. This was their only chance to bring down the operation that had terrorized their city. "Rise, do you see her?" he asked, his grip tightening on the steering wheel as he maneuvered through the traffic. "Not yet, but we're gaining on her," Rise replied, her eyes scanning the road ahead. They rounded a corner, and for a brief moment, Carter spotted the car up ahead, weaving in and out of traffic. "There she is. I see her," he shouted, adrenaline surging through him as he pushed the accelerator down, urging the car to go faster. The distance between them narrowed as they closed in on the Raven. Carter felt a rush of determination, knowing that capturing her could be the key to unlocking everything. "I'm going to try to block her," he called to Reyes. "Be careful," she warned, gripping her own seat as they took a sharp turn. Carter's heart raced as he swerved into the lane beside the Raven, trying to cut her off. She swerved to avoid him, but in doing so, lost control of the vehicle. He watched in horror as she spun out, the car skidding across the wet pavement before crashing into a light pole with a deafening bang. Smoke billowed from the crumpled front end of the car, and Carter jumped out of his vehicle, rushing toward the wreckage. Rise was right behind him, weapon drawn, and ready for anything. As they approached, they could see the Raven struggling to pull herself free from the wreckage, her expression a mix of rage and disbelief. "You think you've won," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Carter stepped closer, his voice steady and unwavering. "You're done. This ends now." With the sound of sirens growing closer, officers arrived on the scene, moving to secure the area. Carter felt a surge of relief wash over him as he knew they had finally captured one of the key players in the network. As they pulled the Raven from the wreckage and cuffed her, Carter's thoughts turned back to Maya. They had come this far, but there was still so much work ahead. They needed to ensure that every child affected by this operation received the help they deserved. "You're not getting away with this," Rise said firmly, watching as they loaded the Raven into the back of a squad car. "We'll make sure you talk." Carter felt a sense of satisfaction wash over him, knowing that they had dismantled a part of the operation. But he also knew this was just the beginning. The network might be vast, and there could be more people involved. As they stepped back from the scene, Carter looked up at the storm clouds breaking apart, revealing a glimmer of sunlight. It was a small sign of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was a chance for light to break through. "Let's get back to the precinct," he said to Reyes, determination filling his voice. "We have work to do." They headed back to the car, knowing that the fight was far from over. But with each step, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were not just police officers. They were protectors, and they were going to do everything in their power to ensure that children like Maya would never again have to endure the horrors of exploitation and fear. Together, they would fight for justice, unravel the web of deceit, and bring every last perpetrator to justice.